other notes.
That's 20.
So some of them are you.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Most of my students are.
That's great.
Is there anybody on class that I've skipped for this sheet?
All right. I think we'll begin. Hi, everyone. Welcome. My name is Roz Siegel. I direct the master's program in Holocaust and Genocide Studies here at Stockton University. It's a pleasure, it's an honor to have Dr. Penha-Lopes with us today. Just want to also thank the Africana. Can everyone hear me? Yes. The Africana Studies program and the Political Science program, together with my program, the MOC program, for co-sponsoring and organizing the event. I'll present Dr. Penha-Lopes briefly, and we'll have a lecture of about 30 minutes or so, and then looking forward to questions and for discussion. So Dr. Penha-Lopes is professor of sociology at Bloomfield College of Montclair University here in New Jersey, co-chair of the Brazil Seminar at Columbia University, a research fellow at the Washington, Brazil office, a member of a research group at the Federal University in Rio de Janeiro, and a former member of the executive committee of the Brazilian Studies Association, BRASA. A native of Rio de Janeiro, Rio de Janeiro, Dr. Penha-Lopes graduated with honors from the Federal University in the city with a bachelor's degree in social sciences in 1982, and from New York University with a master's degree in anthropology in 1987, and a PhD in sociology in 1999. As a postdoctoral fellow at the Universidade de
State University, I forgot to translate it. The State University of Rio.
The State University of Rio in 2006, 2007. So as a postdoctoral fellow back in Rio, Dr. Penha-Lopes did research on the first graduating class of Brazil University quota students. You might tell us a bit more about that today at some point in your talk. Dr. Penha-Lopes has lectured extensively on comparative race relations and has appeared on various high-level media outlets, including BBC of London and the Washington Post. She is the author of the presidential elections of Trump and Bolsonaro, Whiteness in the Nation, from 2 years ago, and we'll hear about this not today. And in 2017, also authored Confronting Affirmative Action, University Quota Students and the Quest for Racial Justice. And she has, in addition, authored and co-edited a number of other books in English and in Portuguese. So it's a pleasure to have you here today with us. Looking forward to hearing from your expertise, your research, your experience on a topic that I think is very urgent and timely. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Looking forward to the discussion. Please.
Thank you all for coming. There are a lot of you here, so thank you for coming on Halloween. And I would also like to thank Dr. Siegel for the invitation and the opportunity to discuss this topic with you. I have been asked to talk about my latest book, as Dr. Siegel mentioned, the presidential elections of Trump and Bolsonaro, Whiteness and the Nation. Which focuses on the, can you see me in the back? Okay, which focuses on the similarities between the Trump and Bolsonaro campaigns concerning race relations in general, whiteness in particular, and the idea of nation in each country. The idea for this book was born in 2018, having written 2 books on affirmative action in Brazil in 2013, the other was published in 2017. I wanted to turn to the study of whiteness in the United States, which I thought had gained even more prominence with the election of Donald J. Trump to the presidency 2 years earlier. His campaign promised to make America great again, which included the construction of a wall between the United States and Mexico in order to prevent immigration from a country which, according to him, sent mostly criminals, and efforts to curtail the entry of Middle Easterners and Africans, all of whom are racialized as non-white, fed into a history of racial exclusion only at times interrupted in the United States. Meanwhile, in Brazil, Jair Messias Bolsonaro, a former army captain with a parliamentary career nearly 3 decades old, was elected president in 2018. The year before, Bolsonaro had made an incendiary speech during which he referred to non-white Brazilians with disdain. He equated to cattle the residents of quilombos, communities which had been created by fugitive slaves, and vowed to appropriate indigenous land in order to explore it commercially. In saying so, Bolsonaro ignored the Constitution of 1988, our most recent constitution, which guarantees territorial rights to both groups. Again, the fact that neither Quilombo residents nor Brazilian Indians are white brought to mind the century-old struggle by Brazilian elites to make the country whiter and thus better. The first round of the Brazilian presidential election took place on October 7, 2018. In Brazil, presidential elections run for 2 rounds, unless a candidate achieves over 50% of valid votes in the first round. The designation of 2 rounds was stipulated in the 1988 Constitution, according to which the president-elect shall be the candidate who, registered by a political party, garners the absolute majority of the votes, not computing the blank and no votes. Fernando Henrique Cardoso, who was president from 1995 to 2002, and is the founder of the Brazilian Social Democracy Party, is the only candidate ever elected in the first round. In 1994, when he won over 54% of the valid votes, and in 1988, when he won 50% of the vote. In both cases, his closest opponent was Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva, who would succeed him for 8 years, from 2003 to 2010, and who is the current president of Brazil. As a legal resident of the United States who lives in New York City, I stood in line to cast my vote on October 7, 2018. The long line afforded me the opportunity to hear several fellow Brazilians chanting 17, 17, 17, 17. That was the number of Bolsonaro's political party, the Social Liberal Party in English. Turning toward the sounds, I saw that they were wearing t-shirts emblazoned with a picture of Bolsonaro and the saying, "Make Brazil great again." Not all of them were white, even by Brazilian standards, although given Brazil's fluid racial classification, it is possible that they identified as such in their, thank you, in their native country and tried to pass as such, or perhaps take on a Latino identity in their adopted country. To the shock of many, Bolsonaro won the second round on October 28, 2018. The next day, President Trump tweeted that he had congratulated President-elect Bolsonaro by telephone and that he expected to work closely with him. Soon, newspaper analysis appeared about the alarming similarities between the two presidents, the presidents of the two largest countries in the Americas. I decided then to analyze sociologically the similarities that voters and journalists have pinpointed between Trump and Bolsonaro. My research showed me that far from outliers, both presidents fit into the age-old conceptions of nation that characterize their countries. In fact, the one innovation in their campaigns was their reliance on the internet and the social media to spread their messages. More specifically, both candidates would label any facts that went against them or tarnish their campaigns as fake news, especially if broadcast by the professional media. Both had extremely polemic relationships with them and threatened to censor individual journalists and publications. By producing their own news and allowing laypersons to spread them in their social networks, Trump and Bolsonaro increased their cachet among those who distrusted politics and saw them as saviors and unconventional candidates. Those similarities are not coincidental. First Trump, then Bolsonaro were closely connected with Steve Bannon, a master of the alt-right movement. Alt-right is the abbreviation of alternative right, a movement based in the United States which congregates white nationalists and the far right, which employs the redefinition of the notion of truth. In other words, post-truth, a tactic employed by the far right in the United States and Europe and an important component of Bolsonaro's presidential campaign. So some sources of similarities between the two countries, not just the men, as I argued in my book, Confronting Affirmative Action in Brazil, race acts as a mirror, standing at the core of the national identity of both Brazil and the United States, as both countries have relied on it to define themselves from their inception, from their beginning. Through the mirror of race, Brazil sees the United States as racist and itself as a racial democracy. In turn, the United States has often looked at Brazil as a racial paradise, especially for Blacks. In fact, however, those countries are more similar than it is usually acknowledged by that comparison. A similarity between the two countries is that both rely on myths to think of themselves and to present themselves to the world. The United States sees itself and is recognized by at least part of the world as the land of the free, the land of democracy, where liberty and the pursuit of happiness are available for all. According to that myth, the American dream is open to all who follow the work ethic, that is, who strive to work enough to reach their goals, because the country offers all kinds of opportunities to all, especially since the institution of affirmative action policies with the Civil Rights Act of 1964.
Okay.
The focus is on individuals, not society. If they do well, it is because they gave their all. So their success is their merit alone. If they don't do well, it's their fault. Maybe they're lazy or less intelligent. In Brazil, in turn, Brazil presents itself as a cordial country, the land of samba, real football, and beautiful women, where the races coexist in harmony, and fun is had by all. Particularly when Brazilians present themselves to foreigners, they like to emphasize that our racial mixture makes us special, which leads many foreigners to believe in the idea of racial harmony and racial democracy. Sociologists and anyone who is more attuned to the histories of the two countries know that both of those images are too simplistic. Though the United States was founded in the late 18th century, only in the second half of the 20th century did all citizens reach full political representation, to which, up until the early 20th century, only those regarded as white could become naturalized U.S. citizens. Women gained the right to vote in 1920, but continued to be paid less than men. North American indigenous populations were exterminated, expelled from their land, tricked into signing treaties with the federal government, and forced into reservations against their will. American Indian children were taken from their families and adopted by white families in order to become civilized well into the 20th century. And they continued to have limited access to education and other means of upward mobility. The enslaved were not considered fully human, but beasts of burden. After the 1857 Dred Scott Supreme Court decision, a slave was worth 3/5 of a man, which helped the slaveholder states achieve political representation. Despite emancipation in 1865, former enslaved persons and their descendants enjoyed civil rights for a relatively short period, not only because they were terrorized by the explicitly racist Ku Klux Klan from 1865 on, but also because they were relegated to second-class status in 1896 with Plessy versus Ferguson, the Supreme Court decision that institutionalized legal racial segregation. Separate but equal often meant isolated and unequal. The Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882 barred them from entry, and the Japanese were routinely attacked as they were taken to be Chinese. During World War II, Japanese Americans were the only group that was confined to internment camps and had their businesses confiscated. As for Brazil, the first enslaved Africans arrived soon after Portugal started to colonize Brazil in the 16th century. That is over a century before slavery started in North America. Despite the belief that Brazilian slavery was more benevolent than the one in North America, history registers many cases of physical cruelty, such as beatings, body lacerations covered in salt, chaining, amputations, and rapes, and also psychological punishments such as public scoldings and sales of relatives who never saw each other again. The vast indigenous population in Brazil was also legally enslaved until the 17th century, be it to work in the extraction of Brazil wood or as a result of just war, so-called, the colonizers' attacks to usurp their land. With independence in 1822, slavery persisted despite internal and external pressures. Abolition was piecemeal, with the Free Wound Law of 1871 and the Sexagenarian Law of 1884, which protected the slave masters more than supported the former slaves. Full abolition in 1888 left the former slaves with no economic support and no comprehensive insertion in the paid job market. At the turn of the 19th to the 20th century, both the United States and Brazil dealt with their non-white populations by promoting eugenicist ideas and refusing to extend full citizenship, that is the right to vote, to non-whites. Both countries promoted massive immigration in that period, but with different logics. Unlike the United States, which classified millions of immigrants, even Europeans, as non-white, but at least they were not Black like the former slaves, Brazil encouraged European and Japanese immigration precisely because it saw them as non-Black. As part of a eugenicist project, the Brazilian federal government authorized the entry of over 3.5 million European and Japanese immigrants between 1889 and 1930, and granted them access first to agriculture and then to the burgeoning industries. Since then, Brazil has grappled with the dilemma of yearning to dilute its African blood, to use a language from that time, while knowing full well that the majority of even its so-called white population is miscegenated, which makes Brazil non-white in the eyes of the United States and Europe. The Brazilian Constitution of 1891 supported the eugenicist movement when it ignored racial equality, For example, when it deprived of political rights the illiterate and the beggars, who were the majority of the former slaves, and when it reinforced an 1854 law that allowed indigenous land to be regarded as vacant land and transferred to the states. Only in the 1988 Constitution was the right to land of the indigenous and the Kilovola recognized. However, that right is constantly and violently challenged. In other words, a major similarity between the United States and Brazil, I argue, is their slavery past, given that ever since then, the two countries have grappled with the full integration of their non-white members. So I'm going to talk a little bit about whiteness. Actually, take some water. Whiteness is, simply put, the socially determined white identity. Rather than biological, it varies in space and time. For example, in the United States, it is defined as racial purity, and in Brazil, it is defined as racial mixture. So in Brazil, due to the racial democracy ideology, there are white gradations. In Brazil, one can be very white or a little white. But on the other hand, white is also an extreme, black being the other extreme. But white can be just a classificatory term, a neutral term. Now, obviously, white privilege is not neutral. It is the high status associated with whiteness, regardless of class. And finally, white supremacy occurs when whites use their privilege to create a system that keeps them in power. For example, the United States Constitution, as we know, starts with "we the people," but granted full rights only to wealthy white men. Even after a series of amendments, legislative changes, executive acts propelled in large part by the civil rights movement, only whites have the guaranteed right to come and go, be treated according to their real status rather than an imagined inferior status, and to be certain that their lives are not at risk depending on the clothes they're wearing or the way they look at a police officer. Also, only in 2008 did the country elect a Black president. The fact that he was reelected 4 years later led people to assert that the United States had become post-racial. Of course, when we list the attacks on Blacks during Obama's tenure and beyond, not to mention the insults hurled at his wife, such as calling her a monkey in heels, shows that that was not the case. So, although the two countries have defined whiteness in diametrical opposition, right? The United States, as I said before, white is pure, and in Brazil, white comes from mixing and remixing. I argue that the elections of Donald Trump in 2016 and of Jair Bolsonaro 2 years later reflect the racial hierarchy of their societies, as well as the strength of the ideology of white supremacy that is necessary for that struggle to remain in place, despite efforts to dismantle it. Far from outliers, both presidents fit into age-old conceptions of nation that characterize their countries, one based on the exclusion of non-whites. According to that logic, regardless of class and gender, whites responded to Trump's nativist call to exclude undesirable immigrants and also his promotion of racial resentment, which means subtle feelings of hostility toward African Americans, according to political scientist Alan Abromowitz. It is different from old-fashioned racism, which involves beliefs about the white race's inherited superiority and right to dominance. Trump based his presidential campaign discourse on ideas that feed on the fear of a significant proportion of the population to lose ground to minorities, women, and foreigners. His conservatism also appealed to evangelicals who felt the country was being taken over by liberals and felt slighted by them. Abromowitz shows that racial resentment has been growing in this country since the 1980s, especially among white Republicans. Resentment today defends meritocracy, the idea that non-whites don't deserve to do better because they are less diligent than whites. In Brazil, the country with the largest population of African descent outside of Africa and the largest miscegenation rates in the world, the votes for Bolsonaro, I argue, pointed to the social wish to achieve whiteness and thus eliminate or at least abate the insecurity that comes from a belief in the racial inferiority of non-whites. For example, General Hamilton Mourão, Bolsonaro's running mate, characterized Brazil's cultural heritage as the product of the Portuguese inclination to want privilege for themselves, the African malandragem, which in Portuguese means an aversion to work, and the indigenous indolence. He claimed that he self-identified as indigenous. Months after he said that in 2017, he introduced his grandson as, this is the quote, a good-looking guy over there, you see? Whitening of the race. Despite such blatantly racist statements, a proportion of non-white Brazilians, including quilombolas, campaigned for Bolsonaro both in Brazil and abroad. Now, talking specifically about Trump, since 2008, Trump had been questioning Obama's citizenship by claiming he had been born in Kenya and was Muslim, and so he joined the birtherism movement. Are you familiar with the birtherism movement? Right, that Obama could not be president. His presidency was fraudulent because he wasn't a US citizen. During his 2016 campaign, Trump questioned the citizenship of Americans of Mexican descent and called, as we already know, Mexican immigrants criminals. Trump attacked his opponent, a white woman, Hillary Clinton, as crooked. So nowadays it's call me Kamala, and then it was crooked Hillary. He also promised to bring back jobs historically associated with the white working class, such as coal mining. That way, Trump brought back the racism, a nativism, and a populism that had succeeded in closing the US borders from the 1920s to the 1960s. Early in his tenure, Trump ignored the 1965 law that reopened the borders and called for the restriction of entry of Middle Eastern immigrants for being terrorists. And he also made racist comments about African countries, El Salvador and Haiti as whole countries, as not, okay, countries, whose citizens should be barred from migrating to the US, unlike Norwegians, you may remember. Now, as for Bolsonaro, his campaign, which began on March 1st, 2016, emphasized the prosperity way, a decent wage that would rescue the country from its ethical, moral, and fiscal crisis. The fiscal crisis would be combated with less state intervention, so less, fewer welfare policies. The moral and ethical crisis would do away with ideas and practices that tarnish the traditional family, such as gay rights and the restoration of women's roles as queens of their homes. The Prosperity Way also aimed at eliminating racial quotas, which he saw as something that made Blacks appear inferior, as all are equal before the law. And by the way, I think that it's no coincidence that Bolsonaro so denies the existence of racism in Brazil, given his longing for the military dictatorship, which ruled Brazil from 1964 to 1985. When at that time, even suggesting that there was racism in Brazil was regarded as subversion subject to exile. Okay, and the slogan was Brazil, love it or leave it. You're not happy, get out. And if you don't get out on your own, we might make you disappear. Now, the obvious similarities with Trump, similarity with Trump's slogan is not mere coincidence, because as I mentioned before, Steve Bannon was Trump's campaign manager and subsequent member of President Trump's White House Council, who would fall in disgrace in 2017. He left jail just this week. Denied taking part of Bolsonaro's presidential campaign. However, Bannon met with one of Bolsonaro's sons in New York City in 2018. Afterwards, he declared to BBC News Brazil that he had found the Brazilian candidate a leader, brilliant, sophisticated, and very similar to Trump. And Trump and Bolsonaro, as I mentioned before, presented themselves as saviors, restoring their country to a glorious past. So fixing the economy, both of them, getting rid of undesirables, and in the case of Bolsonaro, also getting rid of corruption. Another similarity was the way both presidents presented themselves as outsiders, both candidates. Trump was not a politician and Bolsonaro was a former captain, as I mentioned before, who continued to emulate that style and longed for the return of the military dictatorship. Despite his nearly 30 years as a congressman, he was a member of the so-called low clergy, which concerns those with little influence, and he had also changed parties a number of times. Like Trump, Bolsonaro appealed to evangelicals and conservatives who were appalled by what they saw as a lack of morals, evidenced by the expansion of rights to the LGBTQ plus population, the ideology of gender, feminism, this is this term, abortionists and gaysists, which he presented as the result of years of a leftist government, that is the elections and re-elections of Lula and Dilma Rousseff from the Workers' Party between 2000 and 2014. Moreover, Bolsonaro vowed to end corruption and return rights to cidadãos de bem, like well-heeled citizens, rather than rely on human rights. So another slogan was "Bandido bom é bandido morto." It's like a good criminal is a murdered criminal. So no human rights, no right to a trial, just execute. 80% of evangelicals voted for Trump, despite his 3 marriages, allegations of adultery, behavior bordering on incest regarding his older daughter, and despite the fact that Hillary Clinton was a Sunday school teacher. And Bolsonaro also relied on evangelicals strongly. Both Trump and Bolsonaro also displayed misogynistic attitudes and behavior. Trump's presidential campaign, you may recall, was marked by many accusations by white women of sexual abuse against him, not to mention audio evidence of a conversation Trump had with television interviewer Billy Bush about touching women without their consent. As a result, Bush was fired from NBC. Nearly 20 women had accused Donald Trump of sexual harassment and assault going as far back as the 1970s. Donald Trump denied them, claiming in 2018 that they were all false accusations, fake news. In some cases, he even claimed he had never met them. All of the accusers, as I said, were white women. This year, as we know, he was found guilty of 34 counts of fraudulent payment to an adult star so she could keep quiet about their affair. And I'm mentioning, stressing white women because 53% of white women voted for him in 2016, even though his opponent was a white woman. In contrast, close to 100% of Black women and nearly 70% of Latinas voted for Clinton in 2016. Although I have found no record of accusations of physical or sexual abuse against Bolsonaro, his contempt for women was apparent well before he launched his candidacy for president. In 2013, Congressman Bolsonaro had called Maria do Rosário Nunes, a congresswoman from the state of Rio Grande do Sul, a tramp, a vagabunda, and told her he would not rape her because she didn't deserve it for being so ugly. In 2014, he repeated the same insults. Then, on June 13, 2019, he apologized to her via Twitter, claiming that it was all the result of a heated ideological sparring between 2 members of parliament, during which he claimed she had called him a rapist. In fact, his apology was the result of a federal judicial order, which also intimated him to pay her a fine in the thousands of reais to cover moral damage. I was in New York when Trump was inaugurated, in Rio when Bolsonaro was inaugurated, and again in New York when Trump lost the 2020 election, although according to him and JD Vance, he actually won the 2020 election. As fate would have it, the COVID pandemic spread while I was home in Rio writing this book. The similarities between the two presidents were glaring in the way they dealt with the pandemic. The denial of science. President Trump suggested that if the best prevention against contamination was hand washing, soapy water be injected in people's bodies, including their lungs, to wash off the virus. That followed his suggestion that ultraviolet laser-like beams be shot at the victim. Asked by a journalist whether there was any evidence for that, Trump retorted, "I'm the president and you are fake news." Trump said he was being sarcastic after much repercussion, but then he threatened to stop having news briefs about the pandemic. He also threatened to fire Dr. Anthony Fauci, who disagreed with him about the efficacy of hydroxychloroquine to cure the viral infection. In turn, Bolsonaro also quickly dismissed the coronavirus pandemic as just a little flu, to which he was probably immune due to his athletic constitution. Like Trump, he claimed the use of masks was unnecessary and a sign of weakness. Bolsonaro also fired a number of ministers of health when they disagreed with his policies or lack thereof. Throughout the pandemic, Trump denied its lethality. Bolsonaro made fun of those dying of the virus infection, including pretending to be unable to breathe and laughing about it. The more contamination climbed, the more outrageous pronouncements Bolsonaro made. For example, in April of 2020, when deaths were close to 4,000 in Brazil, he declared, "So what? I'm not an undertaker." 8 days later, when there were already over 70,000 cases and over 5,000 deaths, Bolsonaro asked rhetorically, "I'm sorry, what do you want me to do? My name is Messias, which means Messiah, but I'm not a miracle worker." In both countries, the poor and the non-white were the most affected by the pandemic due to their limited access to health care. In the end, the two purported saviors did little to save their countries from the pandemic. Turning the pandemic into a political issue delayed the employment of measures to contain it and led to the pursuit of medical dead ends. It also framed the issue as an intense polarization between naysayers and alarmists. The refusal of both presidents to wear masks and to label those who did losers, weak, and less manly encouraged behavior that resulted in preventable contaminations. The US was number one, the number of deaths, and Brazil was number two. The false contradiction between Trump and Bolsonaro, established between population health and economic robustness, ultimately affected both and helped to cost Trump his reelection. However, Trump tried to reverse the results and even incited a crowd to invade the Capitol to ensure that reversal on January 6, 2021. In October 2022, Bolsonaro also lost re-election, and on January 8, 2023, a crowd invaded the Senate, Congress, and Judiciary buildings in Brasilia in a futile attempt to keep Bolsonaro in power. I would venture to say that that is more than a coincidence. And now, in less than a week, as we know, Trump will attempt re-election again, vowing to make America great again, I guess again, right? After having mocked Joe Biden as too old for re-election, he now has to contend with Vice President Kamala Harris as his opponent, which makes him the old one. He has resorted to questioning her intelligence, her capacity to run the country, and to doubt her racial ethnic identity by claiming that she had always been identified as Indian and only claimed to be Black when she became the Democrat presidential candidate, which is not true. Trump also tries to erase his racist past by equating himself to Blacks after he was indicted on 34 counts of fraud, with a claim that, like them, he is a victim of the criminal justice system. However, at the same time, he continues to focus on barring immigration, even insisting that Haitian immigrants in Ohio are dog and cat eaters, despite the complete lack of evidence. He has affirmed that immigrants must be barred because they bring bad genes to the country. A clearly eugenicist statement that makes me wonder whether we are reliving the early 20th century. Trump's nativism brings to mind the events of exactly 100 years ago, when the Immigration Act of 1924 closed the US borders in response to intense feelings that this country would be destroyed by undesirable foreigners, which makes me believe that my argument about Trump's election in 2016 being related to the importance of whiteness in determining who belongs in this nation still holds true. The difference is that this time, Trump has told sympathizers this will be the last election they will have to vote if he wins, and vow there be a bloodbath if he doesn't win. If Kamala Harris turns out to be the winner, we will have to see whether the country takes the opportunity to confront its system of racial ethnic inequality once and for all, or will bury its head in the sand and allege once again that the country is now post-racial. Thank you.
Thank you so much for, Lopez. Let's have a conversation about this. Questions?
I'll start with a question. While I'm doing that, actually, I'm passing around this sheet for anyone who's in Dr. Reed Merritt's class. You could just, it's a sign-in sheet. So this will be coming around for folks. I'll start over here. My question is, what is Bolsonaro up to today? Like, so he, lost his election. Is he talking about running again at some point in the future? What's
His wife is.
I'm sorry?
His wife is.
Oh, okay.
And so that's one. Secondly, when he lost the election, which he claims he did and the whole thing, he went to Florida and he stayed in Florida. He did not pass the baton. He did not take part in Lula's inauguration. And then when he went back, there were the Capitol Police went after him because he had gotten gifts from Saudi Arabia, diamonds and Rolex watches, and the presidents are not supposed to keep these things to themselves. So, but he's not in jail. Now, I think he is ineligible for 8 years, but his wife is not. So there's talk that she'll be a candidate in 2026. And then in addition to that, he has created a Bolsonarismo in the country so that even if he doesn't run, there'll be other people who could run. I say that there are some people who are more Bolsonaro than Bolsonaro.
Mhm.
So now, we just had an election in Brazil for mayor, and his party, candidates from his party won in a number of states. So there is indication that a Bolsonaro-like candidate might win in 2026, also because, on Lula's side, on his party, there's only Lula. There hasn't been, another candidate who might, it could appear until 2026, but so far, no. So,
So like the MAGA movement, there's
Right.
a Bolsonaro, okay.
right.
Yeah. You can go ahead and then.
Yeah. Nobody died, but they stormed the Capitol. It was a caravan. It was paid for by Bolsonaro sympathizers. So there were buses and buses coming from different parts of the country, because there's Brazil there, right? In South America, Brasilia is a projected capital, right? It was inaugurated in 1960, and it's in the middle of the country. But the main city, like Brazil's development was on the coast, right? So then Rio, Sao Paulo, and then the south, all these caravans coming, and they went in, did bodily functions on things, just like here, destroyed, you know, furniture, clocks from the 18th century, like paintings, and broke a lot of things. And it's like, yeah, and this, and they also, this was one part. Another part stayed out on the street in front of army bases saying, take over the government, take over the government. And you know, the military refused to do a coup, to, you know, it's like, you won, Lula won, but Lula won by, I think, like 1.5% difference, which again, you know, that's very little, I think. So it could happen, you know. There's a movement, right?
You had your hand up and-
But, what?
So you said, he's coming back, right? Like, I mean, he or his family member.
Yeah, because all his, 3 of his sons are politicians, and there's a fourth, no. Yeah, 3, and then I think there's a 4th one. So he is not, but he continues to go to rallies and things like.
Yeah, the question is like, why people choosing their family? Is that lack of leadership, or Brazil is huge country, should have some more people like you, like, you know, like him, or some other leaders, other movements, other people.
Mhm.
Why he's coming back? What do you think?
Because he likes power.
He likes power, but why people choosing him?
Because, as I was saying, like the rest of the world, in many parts of the world, the far right is gaining ground, right? In different countries in Europe, here in the United States, it's in Brazil. So there's that. So there's a lot of support, like any movement, any far right movement, right? Like in one country has support from other countries, because yeah, it's not localized. I mean, we see the results locally, but it's a much wider movement. And then the other thing is like Brazil's tradition of ruling the country. Brazil is huge. At one point, like in 1500, when the Portuguese got there, you had like thick forests. Nobody wanted to go to Brazil. So the Portuguese crown gave people land, right? And it's like as an incentive. And that land was passed down from generation to generation. So politics in Brazil is very much like having power, right? Like concentrated in the hands of, you know, some families. And then come to think of it, that's not that different from the United States, right? Like the Roosevelt, the Bushes, the Kennedys. You know, the thing is for us, it's like, wow, yeah. The one major difference, right, between Brazil and the United States is that I would think, being Brazilian myself, that people know that there is inequality. You know, all kinds of inequality, whereas here, people are more likely to believe that there is equality. They believe more in equality than there is inequality, you know? So there, I would say that would be part of it.
So a lot of people here in America, we see how Trump's presidency enacted quote unquote hope between his supporters and himself, like such thing as him like printing the Trump Bible and things like that. Very cult-like things. Would you say that Bolsonaro's supporters are this, like, it gives hope, like it's?
I'm glad you asked this question, because, you know, in trying to condense my talk, I didn't mention that Bolsonaro's followers call him myth. Mito, mito. Whenever he gives a speech, he's like, mito, mito. And then those who don't follow Bolsonaro call his followers God, cattle. Because they buy into everything he says. You know, when he says something really outrageous, oh, you know, he was joking.
Yeah.
Like, does it sound familiar? So,
They have the same kind of.
oh God, yeah, yeah. And I think that the fact that like his Bolsonaro's wife made him convert, you know, and so they're evangelical, they have tremendous entry there. And the pastors say you're going to vote this way or that way. There is a movement now of evangelical pastors who are opponents of Bolsonarism, but most of them are for Bolsonarism because, you know, what is happening to the country, all these rights, you know?
So,
I can't.
at the
Oh,
end,
now I see.
at the end, you mentioned, like wondering if America, would return to a sort of post-racial in the, ironic sense, way of thinking if/when, Kamala Harris gets elected, like we did with Obama. My, I've thought about that too. But my thinking is, and I guess I also want to get your opinion on this. Like, how do you think the, I feel like a lot of people now are a lot more politically aware than they were before. And also, I feel like, Trump's both run in office and his actual like campaigning up towards that, really made it a lot more socially acceptable to be outwardly bigoted. How do you think like that will interact with the sort of possibilities or like, I guess like that post-racial outcome?
No, I think that, as you said, I was being ironic, right? I'm gonna give you, once again, allege that the country's post-racial, right? By burying its head in the sand. Because you said that you think that, more people are more politically aware today, but I think that, I don't know, I think that so many people are politically apathetic this time, because now we have 8 years, right, of Trumpism, of him saying all kinds of things. So if more people were politically aware today, would the election be so close that we are like wondering who's gonna win? You know, saying outrageously racist things, about Haitians, continuing with the whole, bad genes, which is new. He didn't say that in 2016. Now he's saying, so you're right, like he's being more and more blatant. And insisting that he won the election, you know, so I think that's how I feel. I really wonder about that. I think, will history repeat itself? Because we know that the laws are not written in stone, right? We saw Roe v. Wade. I was talking to Dr. Siegel this morning. It's like, what next? Are we going to revoke Loving versus Virginia? Will it be against the law for people of different races to get married? I don't know. So I think it's more apathy. It's like, I'm not gonna read it, it's too long. Oh, I hear him saying these things, but come on, you know him. It's because what he says doesn't affect, at least what people, how people claim they're going to vote, but it doesn't affect that at all, you know?
I feel like a lot of people have the idea of policies versus character. Would you say that Bolsonaro's policies were quote unquote better than his character?
No.
Same with Trump. People try to say his policies over his character, but his policies reflect his character and that he does not care about anybody who's not the top 10%.
And then in the case of, one difference between the two that I didn't mention is that Trump was born very wealthy. Bolsonaro was not. You know, his father was a lay dentist in the countryside of the state of São Paulo. And one of the reasons he got into politics was to Because he was an army person, you know. He made it to captain, but it's like, oh, our salaries are very low and, but then as a president, like, for example, when people would ask, what are you gonna do about the economy? Because we're gonna change all of this. Why would we changing all of this? Okay, so how are you gonna change the economy? Well, I don't know. I'm not an no, that's not, I'm not an economist. Ask him. He's gonna be my minister of economy, of the economy. Ask him. But it was a neoliberal agenda, right? Like, remove the state, let's sell land, let's try to explore indigenous land because it's full of, you know, everything, right? All, you know, minerals and all kinds of things like that. He went after education, especially higher education, because he said that higher education created communists. So guess where, you know,
Trying to go after the Department of Education.
yeah, so it's like, social science and philosophy. Well, what is that for? Nobody makes money, getting a degree in social science and philosophy. So he cut the funds, to, like, his government, cut the federal funds for research, because in Brazil, state and federal universities are completely free. Okay, I went to the Federal University of Rio, not a cent, completely free. And then, of course, universities have to do research, right? So it's, yeah, but I'm not, what is it? We're not paying for this kind of research, because that's silly. But in the meantime, when he also, fired the head of the, I'm trying to say that in English. The governmental organ that looks at, you know, the amount of the Amazon that's being burned, you know, climate change, all of that. He fired him, was a very renowned physicist, because he said the burning is escalating. If we continue to be this way in such and such time, there'll be no Amazon. He fired him. No, he said, his government, right? You have to deny what he said. He said, I refuse to deny that. It's based on satellite pictures, so he was fired. So policies, but I'll say that the one thing that he did that I liked was, and what is it, daylight savings time, that makes me, you know, lose sleep every year. It was like, oh, you're not gonna have that in Brazil anymore, great. Now
Tanya,
obviously there's gonna be.
There's a question here on the Zoom
Okay.
that I wanna, someone is asking, given that in society, there are many experiences with women not being able to attain or has ever attained the level of power of the presidency, do you believe that other countries will give the same respect to Kamala Harris that they are expected to give to a male figure such as Trump or previous presidents?
I think so, because.
Especially in view of what you said about the global phenomena, the far right and far right populism.
Right, but right now in the world, you have women who are, you know, in power, who are from the far right, but also women who are, you know, on the left, and you have countries that have had more than one woman president. Brazil had elected and re-elected a woman president. Colombia has a woman vice president. So I think so, because one thing that Kamala Harris said in the debate, the one debate she had with Trump, was that it was a joke internationally, right? And that kind of like a puppet, that people knew that they could manipulate him just by praising him, and you know, so in that respect, I think her presentation of self is such that she appears savvier and you know, like firmer on her ground. So no, I think, oh, I should look at the camera. No, I think they would respect her.
Have there been any presidents in Brazil that identify with their, you know, Afro-Brazilian descent? Have there been any, or have they all kind of consider themselves white? I don't know.
That's a good question. They're early in the republic, like the old republic. There was one president, I'm thinking of one, Nilo Peçanha. This is think, early 20th century, who was, at the time, the term was mulatto, right? So he was mixed. And, but people would treat him as if he were white, and he identified as white. Because in Brazil, like some people also say that money whitens, right? So when you have more money, people tend to see you like, oh, you're not that white, you're not that black. And, but then when they fought against him, they would call him, black as an offense, because, for the longest time, calling somebody black is an offense in Brazil. So that one. Then there was Fernando Henrique Cardoso, was a sociologist, by the way. When he campaigned for the first time, because he is white, right? But he said, I have a foot in the kitchen. Meaning, some of my ancestors are black, and he was criticized for that because like, what do you, a foot in the kitchen, but he's not treated as a mixed race or that, he's white. So the answer is no.
The short answer.
Oh.
You just speak up, so.
My question would be, why do you think that? Or like. Spread.
Kind of what?
So. What exactly, generally, like you think, all of it are so like, with like.
Oh, that is a question.
Maybe I'll just repeat the question.
Oh, yeah.
Why are alt-right
Mhm.
movements around the world are so growing in strength, basically, right? The last few decades.
I think, I hadn't thought about that, but I'm gonna try to answer your question. And I think that they make life simpler. It's like easier to think of the world in extremes and also because because nowadays with the spread of like, everybody uses social media, everybody can have a voice. So that's the other thing, that maybe it was one person, then the other person says, and and then it becomes, oh yeah, that's the way it is, Before, I'm old enough to have lived without any internet, only certain people had, like, information was privileged, right? So I think that the alt-right, in addition to having their channels, right? Their internet publications and everything, I think that they help to disseminate all these other, just individual manifestations. And because everybody's connected now, or almost everybody throughout the world, then it becomes like, almost like, oh, that's the way it's supposed to be, And I think also that with the collapse of the Soviet Union, right? There hasn't, the left has been losing ground ever since, right? Let me just say that, I think they've been taking advantage of that neoliberal policies that the state shouldn't intervene, right? But if the state intervention is communism, yeah, but don't we pay taxes? So I want my tax money to go towards certain things. I'd rather my money went for somebody to get a good education, to build more prisons, for everybody to be healthy, to have access to healthcare, rather than, this huge bill because people are not going to work because they're losing their teeth, right? Going to the dentist is super expensive, and you have problems with your teeth, you may end up with heart problems. So, but no, that's communism, No, I think it's common sense, right? It's only one part of communism, not communism, common sense. But anyway, yeah. No, because he said, I'm going back to academia, he was a physics, in this particular case. He was a physics professor, and he said, he's now, running the research branch of government that oversees money allocated to, research at university.
So the political climate right now in Brazil, how's the current president, how is he being perceived as economically, politically? Where do you see this going, or is this Bolsonaro and his group gonna kind of make inroads back?
I think the thing in Brazil is that, now let me start. His approval rates this term, this is his third tenure,
Okay.
are lower than previous. The other, the Bolsonaristas are that continue to make inroads, evidenced by the, success in the election. But then I wanted to say a third thing, that in Brazil, there's, in politics, there is a centrão, like they're in the middle. And people say that in order for somebody to govern Brazil, they have to make deals with the centrão, because that's where most of the politicians are. So even if people make promises, campaign promises, like Bolsonaro was one, I'm not going to pay attention to the centrão, but they have to, because otherwise nothing gets passed, So I think that's one of the problems.
So it's, I know you were saying that they were trying to come up with charges to put against Bolsonaro for like taking stuff that didn't belong to him. Let's say hypothetically, he was charged. And, I mean, at that point, he's a felon. Would he be able to run for the presidency in Brazil, much like we have a felon running for government?
Well, people would say to you that the current president, Lula, is a felon, because he was indicted and charges of corruption that were later overturned, right? But so in 2018, he was competing with Bolsonaro, and he was ahead. And then there was this investigation, he was charged, he was sent to jail, ineligible, and so he could only compete last year. So I think depending on the charge, they go like 8 years without being allowed to go back to office,
Oh, right, you said, but Bolsonaro can't run for 8 years, that's why his wife is running, is that what you said?
I think, well, he hasn't been, he's not in jail, right? But I think people are saying, well, why doesn't he in jail? Like, why they keep postponing this, but yeah, there are charges against him that could potentially put him in jail. We're saying his passport is confiscated, so he can't be, because he can't go to Florida again, so he has to stay there. And
So I had something I wanted to add to the conversation about like the spread of far right ideology, especially online, if that's okay. So there is a phenomenon I have heard about called that has been called the alt-right pipeline, which is basically, for example, say on YouTube or something, when it'll start out as something simple, like say watching a video and someone makes, like they're just doing whatever, and like they make jokes that, one might consider like offensive, like jokes that are kind of punching down, that might come from in maybe like deeper things, deeper health beliefs. And so that kind of normalize, like over time, especially to an impressionable mind, that kind of normalizes those jokes and stuff. And then when say like the YouTube algorithm will notice that you've been watching that content, it will recommend more content like that. And so since you have been desensitized to say like those types of jokes, you, and YouTube has seen that you are consuming a lot of content with that, it will show you things that, it will show you more extreme things. Say like, content now like promoting specific alt-right beliefs or like spewing those types of things. And then so over time, getting desensitized to that, that's usually where most people end up. Like there are farther measures, like, or rather like, I think there are like farther tiers, like, after that, like, normalizing taking like hateful action based on those beliefs, and then I think at like the farthest, it's like big like violent actions and stuff like that. But most people end up at just like the normalizing like those sorts of beliefs. And so I don't know, I just thought that would be interesting to share.
Yeah, no, that's what I was saying before, right? That we take it for granted, right? And you're right. It's like we tend to get only the things that the algorithm thinks we want, not only because we clicked on that, but because they heard us talking, right? It's like, wait a minute, we were just talking about this and now I'm receiving this content. So, if those are your only sources, right, of information, it's very easy to be steered into a specific direction. So that's one of the reasons I think that Bolsonaro's followers are called gado, like cattle, because they follow, right? They follow without question. And which has led to, as I said, intense polarization. I know people who haven't talked to their siblings in years because of politics, you know. People can, like families who can no longer get together because they just fight. And this happens here too.
I have a question, Vanya. So is it probably, you also presented like a bit of a history of, whiteness, and you could say American nationalism and Brazilian nationalism, right? And in this history, it cuts across the political spectrum. So we have like constructions of whiteness, right? And we have all kinds of manifestations of structural racism that are not only on the far right, or of course appeared, well before Trumpism or the Bolsonaro movement in Brazil, right? So how do you see addressing that kind of deep-seated, much more broad framework of thinking about whiteness in the nation, both in the US and Brazil? And of course, it has like a larger, as you said, global context, because we see similar things, and again, with different kind of ideas about race, actually, say in India, right, with Modi,
Right.
so we can say Modism, right, or with, of course, Orban in
Right.
Hungary,
Uh-huh.
Israel with Netanyahu, Putin in Russia. So there's a broader framework. It didn't just come up suddenly, right, in the last decade or so, right? So how do you see, what can you tell us about addressing this, in a deeper way than just say thinking about elections, right? Which are just one way in which people can be active politically as citizens of their country.
Another book. No, I think that as you were talking, I was thinking of how I would answer you. I think one thing is we have to know more, right, about things, because ignorance is not bliss necessarily. And when I see, for example, here in the United States, that the curriculum keeps getting cut, and we're not going to talk about this issue because this was a long time ago, and the children, will be embarrassed, or they will like. It's there, right? It's like, so we're only gonna say, no, this is a great country. But it was a country that was founded the idea that God wanted whites to have the whole land, you know, and whoever's in the way, we're going to do something because this land is ours. And I asked you, did you study this in school? No, did you, you know? And I think that in Brazil too, the curriculum is changing so that less and less is being taught about, you know, things that happened a long time ago. But I think the reason we keep seeing these things is because they're part of the structure, they're part of the foundation. If you remove a building's foundation, the whole building collapses, right? So if these ideas that, no, I have more rights to this than anybody else, if that is in the foundation, then the structure stays in place.
I mean, you talked before, just to follow up on this, you know, someone, I don't remember exactly who said that the effect of creating a culture that's based on lies and misinformation, distortion all the time is not that we come to believe lies, is that we come to disbelieve everything, right? There's no trust in any kind of thing. So what you're saying, in other words, is that, you know, we have to develop perhaps a radical insistence on truth, right? But
Or at
way.
least, you know, the pursuit of it, you know, and I understand that as a sociologist that our position in society makes us see the truth differently, right? Like that there are many truths, but so I think it's the development of thinking critically more than the pursuit of truth. It's like, no, but this is the situation, but how can I look at it from a different angle? Is this really the only angle? Is this really the only thing that happened? You know, that's what I'm thinking. And what I get is like, you know, this is so tiresome to be looking at different things. You know, it's right here. This is good enough, you know? In silence.
Truth. A lot to think about. Thank you so much.
Thank
Dr.
you.
Penha-Lopes, and thank you so much.
Couple quick announcements. My students, just bring your sheet to me. And for Dr. Reed Merritt's class, if you didn't sign this, you need to come see me. If you didn't sign the sign-in sheet.
I have coupons.
Wow, thank you. You wrote a book. Yeah, no, it's fine. Yeah. Oh, thank you.
First, I'll request this.
I'll keep my Not today, though.
The snake with the wire, the white thing.
Professor,
Wait, yeah, I have a picture for, obituary, and I didn't know, like, they took me extra late, like, I just found out today.
But you didn't.
I guess I did. Yeah, sent in a group chat, was like, are you guys still coming? Nobody told me, like, yeah, it was. Yeah. My great grand, and nobody did. Nobody told me. They just said that anybody. Okay, we're not telling anyone. Like, I think who was put there to her? What? Sorry. Oh. Yeah, I possibly find someone else, but then when I went to let you know that I can no longer.
Okay, all right, well, then if you have trouble finding somebody else, though, that'll But,
I watched.
that's. I'm sorry.
I only met her a couple of times, so like, I'm sad about it, but it's like, you know,
Right.
but it's still like, don't, you think you gotta see, you gotta send in the group chat. Are you serious? I keep putting it on my phone.
Thanks, I appreciate it, it was really good.
Talk to your family and let them know, like, hello, y'all need to find somebody.
Next.
Okay, like, thanks.
Let them find you.
I will email you.
We're gonna follow up on this stuff, though, without,
Thank you so much.
yeah.